Page 27. Dependent arising. For a week immediately after enlightenment, the Buddha sat at the foot of the Bodhi tree, experiencing the supreme bliss of emancipation. At the end of the 7 days, he emerged from that concentration, samadhi, and in the first watch of the night thought over the dependent arising as to how things arise thus. When this is, that comes to be, with the arising of this, that arises, namely, dependent on ignorance, volitional or karma formations, dependent on volitional formations, rebirth or becoming, consciousness, dependent on consciousness, mentality material, mental and physical combination, dependent on mentality materiality, the sixfold base, the 5 physical sense organs with consciousness as the 6. Dependent on the sixfold base, contact, depend on contact, feeling, dependent on feeling, craving, dependent on craving, clinging, dependent on clinging, the process of becoming, dependent on the process of becoming. There comes to be birth, dependent on birth, arises aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Thus does this whole mass of suffering arise. In the second watch of the night, the Buddha thought over the dependent arising of how things cease. Thus, when this is not, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases, namely, with the utter cessation of ignorance, the cessation of volitional formations, with the cessation of formations, the cessation of consciousness, and so on, does this whole mass of suffering cease. In the third watch of the night, the Buddha thought over the dependent rising, both as to how things arise and cease, thus. When this is, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this is not, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases, namely dependent on ignorance, volitional formations, and so on. Thus does this whole mass of suffering arise, with the utter cessation of ignorance, the cessation of volitional formations, and so on. Thus does this whole mass of suffering cease. The Buddha now spent 6 more weeks in lonely retreat at 6 different spots in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree. At the end of this period, 2 merchants, Tapasu and Balika, who were passing that way, offered rice cake and honey to the master and said, "We go for refuge to the Buddha and to the Dhamma. Let the Blessed One receive us as his followers." They became his first lay followers, Upasakas. This is the end at page 29.